when we left there, say we, so my siblings, we were then placed with her sister, so my biological aunt, and we remained there for a number of months, and then myself and then a younger brother, my brother who's a year younger than I am, were removed from there. I don't necessarily know exactly what took place, but we were removed from there and then placed into a foster home. And then we stayed there for a few months, and then my brother and I were split up, and then he went to go stay with one of my, or with my grandfather, and then I went to go stay with my biological father. It was pretty cool at first living with my biological father. He and I are a lot alike in terms of just our natural demeanor when he's sober. So that's the unfortunate thing. So he's an alcoholic. So when he was always under the influence of something, is when he became mean and abusive. But when he was completely sober, like he's like the most fun person to be around. Makes light and jokes of like everything. And he's very familial too. Like when he's not under the influence of anything. So going to be, I guess, like some stability in my life. So it's kind of unfortunate, moving forward in terms of like how things began to unravel. Starting out by seeing like more and more people in and out of the house, and then figuring out that he was a drug dealer, and then again, he started to drink more and everything. So when he was under the influence or he was high or whatever, that's when it just wasn't necessarily a great time inside of the home. So we also lived with his future wife, who was his wife now. So I first started living with him, it was just his girlfriend at the time, and then she had her own 3 daughters as well. So it was very interesting to be just placed into this whole different, brand new family dynamic with 4 people that I had no relationship whatsoever. But it's also interesting too, especially examining and looking at the dynamic of like those stepsisters, and even though we're not blood, thinking back to all the things that we went through together, that wholeheartedly, like, those are my sisters. So I remember that Sunday, we would go, me, my 2 brothers, and then my 3 stepsisters, we would go to church every Sunday with the aunt who lived next door, and her name was Aunt Rose, and she since passed. But I remember her, I was very close with her. Like, I loved Aunt Rose. She was just a very, like, warm person to be around. And she just had a really, like, loving nature about her. A lot of people standing around and talk and everything. She just said something along the lines of, there's going to be some people that are going to come talk to you about, like, what goes on at home. And, like, I need you to be a big boy and, like, talk to them about it. And I said, okay, Aunt Rose. And then, like, I knew it was serious when she, like, said no. And she put her hands on my shoulders. And she said, promise me you'll tell them everything that goes on at home. So, sorry, it kind of gets to, like, a little tear after me. It was probably the next day, as I remember it, either the next day or the next 2 days. Being at school and then being called from the office. And then going down and then seeing this woman who I'd never met before, but before going in, one of my youngest brother was there, and I'm like, "What are you doing down here?" And he said, "Like, I don't know, like they were just asking us like a whole bunch of stuff about daddy." So it's just like, okay. So then I go inside of this room, and this lady's there. So I mean, at this point now, I know it was an official interview and an investigation into like what's basically taking place at home. So I mean, she just asked a lot of questions about like how my dad treats us and stuff, and I talked about the whoopings and standing in corners and kneeling with like cases of canned goods and books inside of our hands, and writing sentences like all day until we reached like a certain page limit and all that stuff. And of course, like again, like when that's all you've known all your life or most of your life, you don't necessarily think there's like anything really wrong with it. So the way I articulate it is mostly just as I'm having this conversation right now. Like, yeah, this is just what takes place at home. And we're like walking up this hill to like get home, and then my uncle Darius pulls up, and he said, "Hurry up and like get in the car." So we all go over, get in the cab, and we get home. And as we pull up, I just see that same lady who was conducting this interview outside with this van, and there's just literally like these trash bags of like our clothes essentially that were like being placed into this van. And I get out, and then my dad is like right there, and then he's like, you know what, don't worry, like I'm gonna come back and get y'all and all this sort of stuff. Like, had no idea whatsoever like what was taking place. And I just remember just feeling like heartbroken at that time and like being very emotional and crying and everything. When you're young and then you're hurt and then you're taken away from what you perceived as your family and then not necessarily knowing why you're being removed from that, I honestly kind of feel like I had an objective, which was to make everyone else as miserable as what I was feeling. And a lot of times, it's not because you necessarily dislike the people who you're with. It's more that I hated the situation that I was in. And if I'm uncomfortable, I was going to make everyone else around me as uncomfortable as possible. So I began being defiant, but then also too knowing exactly how far I could press the envelope before it was too much. So I was completely fine with moving from placement to placement, which is why I've been in approximately 2 dozen different places. So that was never an issue with me. It's kind of like I had my own rule that I was just never going to get in any legal trouble. So I never ran away. I never put my hands physically on anyone unless like someone put their hands on me. Um, but I knew like foster parents couldn't like put their hands on me, so I talked back a lot. I really had no filter in terms of like what I was going to say. I just knew that I was in this situation, and then I have these legal protections against me, and that there's nothing you can do. So I'm going to push this envelope as much as I possibly can. And if I was removed from that placement, it was more or less like, well, then I proved myself right. That they couldn't love me through like whatever, and then they didn't necessarily need me. I don't need them, so like on to the next one. That I was smarter than the people who I was with. And it's really unfortunate to sit here and say it now. I mean, I'm 30 years old, so you can kind of look back and think to yourself, if I had a kid in my home who acted the way I did, like, man, I would go nuts. So I'm really now really empathetic and sympathetic to the people who I lived with. And I hope that they would know by now that it was not directed toward them whatsoever. It was more or less like directed at my situation. Um, the comments that they made about me not living to 21 or being in prison by the time I was 21, those were pretty hurtful just because, I mean, I was still a kid. You know, I was 17 years old, still trying to figure out, you know, what I wanted to be and what I wanted to do in my life. And if anything, I mean, it just made me more frustrated to sit there and just have to listen to that. So I think when you start talking to that person who's hurt and struggling and doesn't necessarily know the most productive way to show that they're hurt, I think you make a lot more progress with them versus the person who's just reacting. Some phenomenal people who've all walked in at some really critical times. And, you know, I was introduced to Kathy King at ProKids when I was 11. And I had her, and will still have her in my life, so she's been a part of my life now. Um, geez, how old am I now? So, yeah, 19, almost 20 years. You know, it's crazy to think about that in that manner. So, having someone who's been a part of my life for 20 years is one thing in and of itself. You know, someone who can advocate and really being able to speak to the person who's been hurt and is hurt, not speaking to the person who's displaying certain types of behaviors that may not be appropriate. So having Kathy as a part of my life has been something that's been really instrumental in my life. It was really pivotal, as well as Stacy Sutton, who was my Hamilton County JFS worker. Even meeting with her just once a month and kind of talking about the kind of progress that I made was very influential as well. She was a very light-hearted person, definitely took her job very seriously, but she also gave me the space and autonomy to make decisions that either were great decisions or maybe a mistake, but you allow me to do that, but then not let me fall. Um, then getting to college in that very first year, being introduced to Ron and Phyllis, and having their resources and their relationship in every aspect of my life, whether or not it be professional, whether or not it be personal, excuse me, and whether or not it be academic, has really gotten me to where I am today. Not only did they help me get through my bachelor's degree, but um, their stability in my life throughout my master's degree, and then also too now my doctorate degree has been really great. I was introduced to her my freshman year in college, and it was very interesting because I would sit in her office and talk to her assistant, and then I learned that she used to be a foster parent. So then I would start talking to Sigrid about my foster care experiences, and our relationship just naturally grew into where like that is my mom. So whenever I tell people like, oh, I'm going home, I'm gonna go see my mom or whatever, like I'm always going to her place. Even when I transferred from Wilmington to Mount St. Joe for just one semester, she still came to my theater productions. She still came to my choir performances. Called me almost every day, and when I transferred back before I could start classes again that fall, she let me stay at her house. So he was the first person to talk to me about going to college. As a foster kid, honestly, it's enough of an achievement just to graduate from high school. I mean, what is it? I think it's like somewhere around 50% of foster care children will graduate from high school. So, when you graduate from high school, it's like, now I made it. So, Robert was the first person to kind of talk to me about that's literally just the beginning, which is just graduating from high school. So, once I got to my senior year, that's when we started talking about what are some different things that you want to start looking at toward college. What really got my foot in the actual door of a college was playing football in high school. So, but I played high school football for all 4 years, and my last year, I ended up becoming like a full-time starter. I was a captain of the football team, and then I made it to the All-Star game, and I was all-conference, all-districts. So that's when my coaches started talking to me about like looking at Division III high school because I wasn't like a huge kid. So they started talking to me about looking at Division II and Division III. And then I got there, and then it's a completely different environment than what you're used to, especially the types of high schools and school environments that I went to. So I got actively involved as I possibly could. I found out I couldn't play football anymore because of a curve on my spine. But then I got involved doing theater for 3 years, and then I was in choir for 4 years. I became the student body president my senior year, and then I had this line going. It was like 7 lines of different things that I was involved in. So really just finding myself on the college campus, I guess in a way I was always trying to seek where I could, find myself of being of use to someone, but then also too just kind of ignoring like the realities of life for me, so to speak. So I graduated, and then I got my first job working at my home institution. Having assistantship my last year. Worked at a community college my first year to kind of help offset some of those some of those payments and everything, so I wouldn't take as many loans. And then I got my first job at Colorado State, working in housing. And then I got my second job out in Pennsylvania, working in diversity and inclusion. And then I found my way to Toledo, being the director of diversity and inclusion at Mercy College of Ohio. And I started to think about a lot of different people in my life, and two of them are Ron and Phyllis McSwain. And they saw me through 2 degrees, and I wanted them to see me through a third in terms of like actually seeing me being hooded for a PhD. So was I personally ready to go back to school? I was not, but I was definitely motivated by Ron and Phyllis, as well as some other people in my life, to go and pursue a doctorate degree. I think understanding how different I was has helped me to understand how difference really contributes to respective people's experiences wherever they are. So, being in a program in which I'm learning to appreciate, the multicultural perspective of living in a pluralistic society has really been beneficial, because what you learn is that one of the biggest things that makes a difference is socioeconomic standing. So I can be, we talk about race a lot, but there are African American people or people of color in general who are in some really higher standing places in life who don't understand what it's like to be a person of color and poor. So when you're on a college campus, being able to talk about what difference means, so that students, when they leave and they graduate, they go off into their communities and they can begin making a difference and kind of closing the gap on socioeconomic standings, but then also to a lot of cultural norms that we have in American society. But when we talk about what it means to live in a democracy, we should also be talking about what it means to aspire to reach the ultimate good of like common people. So not looking at people and just recognizing what their difference is, but looking at where they are as a human and knowing that I want the best for this person, hoping that that person also wants the best for me, and identifying what can be those principles and how we can also perpetuate that, not just on this college campus, but out into our communities as well. Because what we understand is that only 1 out of 3 people will go and earn a college degree. Now, there are more people who actually enroll or take classes, but only 1 out of 3 people will actually finish. So when you learn to appreciate that 2 out of 3 people will more than likely live either an average life or below average when we talk about financial income, what does that mean? So as someone who's going to have a doctorate degree, and then my soon-to-be wife is also going to have a doctorate degree, what can we contribute to this world? Not just from with our kids, but through our kids, but in our own communities, communities that don't have as much as what we have. That way we can make sure that we can continue not just building up, but build down as well. So growing up and then first being introduced to counselors and therapists, you're really, I wasn't really interested, more or less, because this is someone who doesn't know anything about my situation, never experienced it more than likely, and doesn't understand how I'm feeling. The one thing that I didn't appreciate at that time was whether or not this person understands, it at least provides me an opportunity to just at least talk about what it was that I was experiencing and why I feel the way that I do. Sometimes just letting that off your chest and just talking about it releases so much of a load, because every single day when you feel like that no one else can understand where you're coming from, that's more baggage and more baggage that you have to carry, versus being able to sit down with someone and unpack it. And whether or not that person understands, that's at least one less thing that I have to carry that day. So now I'm at this place where I really appreciate going and sitting and talking to someone who has no idea how traumatic that actual experience was, but they can also help me kind of revisit and rethink about what all took place and how I can repackage those things to be of use to me in a beneficial manner in terms of how I learn to talk to other people, how I cope with things that I don't necessarily understand myself, but then also too to reimagine or to rethink about what things I struggle with today that has a connection to when I was younger. For instance, um, being in a relationship with someone, so I'm engaged now, and I would tell my counselor that it's really difficult when we're in a really rough spot because I don't know how to like move outside of that. But what I learned was that when you're abused and neglected, you never learn how to appropriately close the loop when something does go wrong. Whether or not it's my fault or my parents' fault, how do we close the loop and then move forward productively? So it's taking a process now of being able to learn how to navigate. Okay, this is what happened. This is where the miscommunication was. This is where our challenge is, but we're okay. I think part of it is just knowing that it's not your fault and it's not you. So I think as kids or as adults even, like we internalize a lot of different things. And when things happen and you don't necessarily know that you're being a bad person or being a bad kid, you internalize that to be that you were the problem. And again, when you're conditioned into a situation, um, you don't necessarily know that what was happening to you was wrong. So part of it is just helping that child to know that it was not you and it's not your fault. You know, you sit back and you think about, you know, spiritually where you are in your own relationship with God, but then also appreciating that not everyone has that relationship with God. But it all boils down to humanity and just being a decent human being. And how can I be a great person to someone else who I may know or may not know? Like, to pay my bills, I am a server at a sushi restaurant. So I had a manager who was talking to me one day, and he said, you know, like I really appreciate the fact that like you treat all your customers the same. And I said, it's because like they're all human, and like no, I'm not better than anybody else, and no one else is better than me. They come in, and there are some people who they can be spending like whatever, but a lot of people don't know that I'm also pursuing a doctorate degree. I don't flaunt that. You know, it's just something that I'm on the road to, but that doesn't define who I am. No one's circumstances, no one's titles, income, none of that defines who a person is. It's how what characteristics we possess that ultimately define who we are. So for me, I just try to treat everybody the way that I would like to be treated, and recognizing that I'm someone who has pushed away a lot of different people, but still there are some very meaningful people who were able to see past all of that and kind of nurture me to where I am today, is also what helps me to want to reach out and give back and kind of see through a lot of those veils that people have, not a lot of those different shields that people possess, that a lot of us just typically don't push to see past. I think that's one of the challenges that we have, at least in American society, is that we don't have a lot of patience for other people, which is the reason why we have so many differences and disputes over even just the most simplest of things. It's okay to have difference, it's okay to have a different perspective, it's okay to have a different lens, but at the end of the day, what principles do we both rely on that allow us to see, you know, where we are as humans? That way we can make a difference and move forward together. There's this line, and I'm gonna not do it any justice, from this movie, Friday Night Lights, where the quarterback is like I think it's his grandmother or maybe his mother who's in this other room, and his football coach is inside of that room, like, and he's, you know, talking to him about what he wants to see and like what he wants to do and like where he wants to go, and this football player cannot see past being like taking care of his grandmother or mother who's clearly ailing in health. And ultimately, what that coach says to him is once you're able to see yourself past where you are here, you're going to seriously fly. So making a lot of the decisions that I've made and moving away from, family members and not being as close because I didn't necessarily see myself even sitting in this chair today, but I knew that I had the potential to be sitting where I am, is what's helped me to fly. So I will tell any kid, anyone struggling through whatever, even if it's an adult, that once you're able to see yourself past all of that, you're seriously going to fly. If there's somewhere you aspire to be, if you honestly believe you can make it in that position, then you can take whatever it is that you're going through right now. So you look at the person who's actually done the work. The other part of it is looking at the other people who've supported that work in progress. So advocacy is a huge thing when it comes to being able to assist someone. So looking at my relationship with ProKids and the things that I've been able to do through the advocacy of ProKids has been a huge benefit to my life. I have such a beautiful outlook on my life, and it is wholeheartedly due to the advocacy and the people who work at ProKids. Not just what is one thing that you think you could leave a kid with? Whether or not you're going to change that person's life in that moment, what is one seed that you can leave that kid with? Because I've been left a lot of seeds that in that moment, they didn't make sense, and I didn't nurture them or water them at that time, but over time, it now blossomed and grew into the person that you have sitting in front of you right now. So whether or not you think that you can actually change a person's life, what is one thing that you feel like you can contribute to someone? And if it's thinking about, a future life and going to college, if it's thinking about, what does it mean to be a citizen in this country? What does it mean to think about, humanitarian efforts or whatever? What is one thing you feel like you can leave that kid? And honestly, when you put it into the perspective of the things that many of us didn't have, you already give them more than enough.